So welcome to another episode of Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left, James Flippin on your right. You know, you would think maybe we'd have a little lull with the new year of news, but it is coming fast and furious. So strap in. You got to get ready. There's a lot to do this week. And a lot of it is not about the president who we have still, Joe Biden. It's almost entirely about Donald Trump dominating the news in ways good and bad. So let's start with something like, it's basically, what would you call this? Tying up a loose end. Donald Trump was sentenced just on Friday. He tried to get the Supreme Court to stop it. They would not. He made two arguments. He said, this is a ridiculous charge, all the problems with the evidence. But he also said, it's stopping me from doing my job as president, which I thought was funny because he said, I've got to have an orderly transition. Ironic, as we'll talk about in future parts of this episode. But it seems like everyone got what they wanted. Sentenced to unconditional discharge, doesn't have to do any probation, doesn't have to go to jail. He just walks on his way. And yet the jury verdict was respected. Are you happy with the way it all worked out?
I mean, I wouldn't exactly say that. No, I think that it's very amusing to me that the news organizations out there, the various Democrats that are continuing to talk about this weaponized prosecution, are keen to say convicted felon going into the White House. Of course, it's interesting to note that the case is going to be appealed. And because of what you alluded to, the evidentiary rules that weren't respected, given what the Supreme Court later said about presidential immunity, the case is very likely to get overturned entirely, not to mention all the stuff that Judge Juan Merchan did throughout the trial to sort of just tilt the scales in favor of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So, look, I think if nothing else, it's good, I guess, that the whole concept of Trump being sentenced isn't a pending thing throughout his time in office coming up here. But yeah, I mean, look, this is a case that involved bootstrapped misdemeanor charges taped together to try to connect to some state level statute concerning campaign finance. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it was an absolute disgrace and a travesty of justice that it happened in the first place. The Democrats at this point want to just kind of take their little consolation prize and say that he's a convicted felon. And we'll see what happens with the future of the case itself.
Yeah, so you express some confidence it's going to get overturned because you believe that the system largely works, that he has a process to go through, and that someone is going to look at all of these things who are judges, who know the rules of evidence, and going to look at the case. That's the point. The point is we have a process. We have a process when you're accused. You have a process to defend yourself. And then it goes to a jury, and then a jury makes their decision. And if you don't like the decision, you can go on appeal. We don't have a process where like, oh, I'm super important, we're going to throw this out. Or I got something really big to do coming up, we're going to pretend it didn't happen. We have a process. He has every right to appeal. I said it to you. I said it to Dominic. I said it to John. Whoever I debate, I said, listen, if it gets thrown out or overturned on appeal, or even if he won the jury trial, I would respect it because that's the system we have. The thing that puzzles me, though, is this whole nonstop Donald Trump is trying to get this thing thrown out, saying it doesn't count, it doesn't count. And finally, someone is standing in there speaking up for this jury. This jury did their job. This jury rendered its decision. And so now a 34-count felon is going to be sworn in. Okay. Okay. All right. I just reset the clock, so you're going to have to give me a 1-minute flag if you got it. I think it was 3:40. I think it was 3:43. Let's call it 4. So you're going to have to give me like a 30-second hand gesture or something like that. Actually, I'll try to do this for, that would be 4, so 12.
You were talking about somebody standing up for the jury.
Yeah, I'm going to start at the response. I'm going to start right after you spoke, though.
Okay.
Well, look, I respect what you have to say because you included the important element there, which is you believe that this is going to get overturned on appeal. You believe that there are legal reasons that it should be. That means that you trust this process going forward, as you should, because this is the best process that we have. It ain't perfect, but it's the best process we have. This whole idea that, oh, my goodness, it's such an unfair thing. Well, there is a right to fairness for the people of that jury and the criminal justice system that did their part. The part to me that is kind of weird to me is this whole idea, well, no, you shouldn't be sentenced. You should throw everything out because Donald Trump is really important. He's a really important guy. He's going to be the president, or he was a candidate, or he was a businessman. No, we have a process even for prosecuting those people. And I have said it to you. I said it to Dominic. I said it to John. If in the course of this thing he is found not guilty, or it's overturned, or they order a new trial because they found some error, that's what we have judges for. I might not agree with everything I see, but I know that they know the law better than I. But I have to tell you, to get back to what I said in the introduction, one of the things he said in his petition to throw this thing out, he said that this sentencing is going to interfere with the lawful transition between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. I think there's a word for that. It's a Spanish word, chutzpah, for a guy who trampled over the transition last time to say, oh my goodness, you're getting in the way of transition, is the height of irony.
Well, look, I'll put on pause for a second any response I may have to January 6th, 2021, and I guess we're going to potentially touch on that here. But no, I'll just say this. I do think that the prosecution of Trump, not just in Manhattan, but perhaps especially that one, the civil actions brought against him, the classified documents case, all of it set a really bad precedent when it comes to the concept of we're going to go at the guy that we think is our top political opponent through a weaponized prosecution. That to me is bad. That to me is something that we shouldn't do as an American system. But I will say this, to your point, and in an overarching way, justice was served. We saw the way these cases more or less benefited Trump politically because the American people were like, what are you guys doing here? Why are you trying to go at some guy on minor potential little technicalities of the law, this, that, the other, to put him out of the race because you clearly don't think you can beat him at the ballot box? So the way that it benefited Trump's campaign, his standing, the way the American people responded to all of that, I actually think it is really encouraging. I just want to say it's a bad idea for people to be using the prosecution power to try to discredit potential political opponents.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have had this argument and debate before, but I think that one of the things the prosecutors said in their petition to basically agree with this sentence was that among the harms that were done here is that Donald Trump again and again and again did everything possible to undermine not just this case, which he could have done in the court of law, but to undermine the entire confidence in the criminal justice system by constantly saying things that were not true. And I have to say, it's a fine line. You say, well, I don't want to criminalize my opponents. Well, what if your opponent did something illegal? What if that actually happened? What if a jury found that actually happened? What if prosecutors believe that actually happened? Mm-hmm. You can't say, well, it looks bad, so we're not going to prosecute someone who broke the law. I mean, I just think that that's not a great place. And by the way, also this week, the same Justice Department said put Menendez behind bars for 15 years, okay? The same Justice Department prosecuted Democrat Anthony Weiner, who's a hero to the left and the hero to Democrats for the fights he would bring on Fox News. If you don't want to be prosecuted, my advice, don't do bad stuff.
Yeah, you've often said that. That's the line that you use, and I understand it. I get your perspective on it, that you think that the justice system kind of goes after people who both happen to be Republican and Democrat. And of course, that's true. But again, it's an unprecedented situation. We talked about it all the time. It's one of the left's favorite things to bandy about. The first president indicted, the first convicted felon to go into the White House. So there's a lot of things that happen to be firsts in this instance. If you out there believe that what Trump did or didn't do is worthy of the first president to ever have been indicted ever before and the so-called first convicted felon to go into office, hey, look, that's your perspective. I
mean, let's not unwrap the history books in an unfair way here. If there actually was someone who brought a civil lawsuit against a sitting president for sexual abuse kind of things under Bill Clinton,
okay,
and he sat for
but of course, that's not a criminal prosecution.
No, I'm saying, but if you want to relate, but you said civilly also, the Eugene Carroll thing. The point I'm making is that when Bill Clinton, he said, what is, and what is, parsing words. But we all know his defense was not, the whole system is out to get me. They did say, I think the special prosecutor went too far. But what Donald Trump did, and he left an impression on the impressionable young mind of one James Flippin, is the whole criminal justice system is completely corrupt. And he gave a roadmap. And the roadmap, and we see Adams following it. We see everyone who's accused in January 6th of Politicization. No one is ever responsible if they carry a gun to the Capitol on January 6th, which is actually our next subject. Let's touch. Unless you want to get it. No, go ahead.
Quick closing point on the Trump aspect of things. Yeah, it's sort of, in my view, something you can look back on, the Ken Starr special prosecution and whatever Bill Clinton did or didn't do in the White House. Definitely standards have changed a bit in terms of, let's say, higher ups and their interactions with interns and things that were frowned upon or maybe kind of overlooked and understood or excused 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. It's not looked at that same way. I think you could make a case that the Clinton thing was a little bit politicized. But in terms of the Trump case, yeah, look, I look at it as a politicized process, one that it never would have happened if it wasn't Trump, the charges that were brought against him. That, to me, is a bad precedent, but yeah, other people are going to say...
I guess the only point I'm making is that if you wanted to see where the tit-for-tat started, going after a president in political ways for private behavior didn't start with Donald Trump. And the very same Republicans that were standing up in that impeachment, I was actually in Congress when that went to the Senate. It had already finished in the House by the time I got there in 99. The very same Republicans were doing the Anthony Weiner line. You're not above the law. You got to follow the law.
And I think it kind of hurt.
You know what I'm saying?
I think it hurt the Republican Congress that they made that a focus of their agenda.
Right. It is unclear. You can always, like, what is the original sin in a political back and forth?
Sure.
It's really not clear. But let's, I have been, as you can tell from how I keep inserting it in our conversation, I am bursting about the fact that since we last met, January 6th, that national date, which is like one of those, like,
ooh.
Well, it's become like October 7th and 9/11. You just say January 6th.
Wow, that's quite a
no, I'm saying in terms of, and December 7th, it's become one of those dates that we all know what someone's talking about when they talk about January 6th. We've now even reduced it to J6, like we did with 9/11.
Patriots Day, as I like to call it.
Yeah, very nice. Okay. I just found it interesting that here it is, the very same people who are suddenly, it's once again, we have a peaceful transition. Once again, no one storming the Capitol. Once again, no one committing insurrection. Once again, no one carrying guns and knives and rope to the Capitol and using bear spray on. And what's the difference? The difference is the Democrats follow the Constitution and the Republicans don't. What say you, James Flippin?
Well, I mean, look, I think that in terms of your classification of what happened on January 6th, we probably have a different interpretation of it, even just on the base level. Maybe I want to call it something of a protest or an uprising, a demonstration that in various ways did get out of hand.
Yeah, because people had guns, but go ahead.
I think that you were probably more on the side of insurrection or attempting to overturn the election's results. Pretty dramatic difference between those two, and that's fair and that's acknowledged. But I think that in terms of what really happened on January 6th, there's a lot of questions that we don't know the answers to. For example, there were 27 or 28 paid informants in the crowd that day. There was an allegation of a pipe bomb that was placed near the DNC headquarters, which they really never got to the bottom of, in terms of who it was that put that there. They released a video recently of an individual supposedly that was doing that was putting that pipe bomb in place. The January 6th Select Committee, as Trump calls it, the Unselect Committee, deleted evidence after the fact.
Not true. That's just not factually not true.
Liz Cheney witness tampered with Cassidy Hutchinson and actually was involved in a secret signal text message conversation or something like that. So there's a lot of questions as to what that really was, January 6th. For example, I look at it as a psyop, more or less, something that was engineered by the federal government to delegitimize the MAGA movement, smear Trump as a candidate, potentially put him in legal trouble, which they attempted to do, impeaching him after the fact. But yeah, that's my recollection.
I don't even know why I'm bothering to ask this question. James Flippin thinks it's a psyop. Is that something that you pulled out of the ass of the internet somewhere? What are you even talking about, the psyop?
So,
it was a Trump administration was in office at the time. What are you even talking about?
So you're saying that of the
I'm not saying anything. You're saying there's a psyop by who? The Trump administration against.
But you're suggesting that because Trump was the president at the time, there were no elements within the federal government that were against him?
You're the one that said there's a psychological operation.
I did.
Against Donald Trump.
Yes.
Now, by the way, were you working at 77 WABC on that day?
No, I was not, actually.
Yeah. Just go back and listen to the tapes. Go back and watch the tapes. Go back and just revisit, not distant history like the 1910s. You don't have to watch a grainy way. You can listen to our station. You can watch Fox News. You can watch Newsmax, OAN, any of them, and see what was going on with your own eyes.
Yeah, I watched it.
That's right.
I remember saying, they're going to make this the biggest deal
really?
ever.
In that case, if you didn't say, holy cow, what they're doing to those cops, you were too busy saying they're going to make it, you were alone.
What do you mean what they did to those cops?
Cops, just about everyone in prison now is in prison for beating the crap out of police officers.
Not true.
Okay. I don't know how to break this down to you. No one is in prison now for wandering into an open door and looking around and leaving. These are people that brought bear mace. And I said, go watch the videos. I'm surprised that you're so intent on making up a story about psyops that you read on some internet troll that has 5 followers that you don't even take the time as a news guy to look at the videotape. Turn off the volume if you want. Look at people getting beaten with Trump flags. It is a sin what went on there. And you're saying, and let's talk about your things. Informants in the crowd. Yes, the FBI has informants in every asshole group, far-right nationalist, anti-American group there is. Of course, they're all there. And you don't like the idea that a member of the committee investigating was in contact with someone who's testifying to the committee that they're
Is that appropriate? Do you think that's appropriate?
100%. How else do they have conversations?
Why would that be appropriate? She's supposed to be getting unvarnished truth from this witness, not coaching her ahead of time as to what she's supposed to say.
What do you think happens when a witness says, I'm going to appear before Congress? They sit down and talk to the staff and the members of what they're going to say so they know what to ask.
So is Liz Cheney a prosecutor in that case, or is she trying to get to the bottom
No, they were doing
of what's
oversight.
happening?
They're not prosecutors. Yeah, no, they referred it to the federal government. And you say, things were erased. Hey, Donald Trump cult member. That did not happen. The Justice Department said it didn't happen. Casey Hutchinson said it didn't happen. There's no evidence that it happened.
Cassidy
The only
Hutchinson.
thing,
There's
here's the only
a
thing.
great source.
By the way, the source of the
Didn't she make up that story about grabbing the steering wheel or something like that?
It's unclear. The source of the January 6 hearings was Democrats. Look at the witness list. Nary a Democrat on the list.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it's
I mean,
Republican.
Liz Cheney, big-time Republican. She was the head of the committee,
I'm not
right?
talking about the committee.
Oh.
I'm talking about the witnesses. The people who said the words that buried your guy, that everyone on Fox News was like, oh my God, this is terrible.
And he clearly got buried because he's about to get inaugurated.
Well, let me say, how about Elise Stefanik? Is she still hiding under her bench saying that Donald Trump should never, ever again hold elected office? No, she's not. She deleted the tweet, but because unlike you, she realizes, oh my God, this is a terrible thing to remember what actually happened. And you know who else remembers? Donald Trump called Ashley Babbitt to that Capitol and got her killed. He should be prosecuted.
He got her killed?
Yes. Why was she there? Who called her there?
Why was Ashley Babbitt at the Capitol building?
Why was she in that crowd rushing the Capitol?
She chose of her own volition to go there.
No, she was
Did
called
Donald
there.
Trump have a chip in her brain and he told her, he pushed a couple buttons on his cell phone and said go?
Okay, let me ask you something. Which rally was Ashley Babbitt attending? Who was she listening to says we're going to march up that hill?
Let's just stop for a second and note the facts that a Capitol police officer by the name of Michael Byrd,
a police officer,
murdered Ashley Babbitt that day without provocation, without cause. It's what's known as a bad shoot.
Why don't you?
In other words, and the left likes to talk about this all the time, if you kill an unarmed person, if you shoot dead someone who did not pose a threat to that police officer in that moment, that is a bad shoot. It's also known as manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide.
I'll play
but
along.
Guess what Michael Byrd has gotten as a result of all that? Promotion,
police officer,
special protection, and celebrations and media interviews and stuff like that. Michael Byrd is a murderer. He ought to be held accountable for what happened that day. There was also a woman, a Trump supporter, who was killed in the crowd that day, bashed in the head.
Typical Republican.
And that's
calling the police
happen.
officer the murderer for doing his job, but the person who was breaking into the Capitol, which he had, not in the Capitol, to the floor of Congress, where members of Congress were cowering under their desk, a guy who was hired to protect them does his job, and no one says, why is Ashley Babbitt there? Because she was fed a pile of bull by her cult leader, and now she's dead. Trump should be indicted for that.
Wow, that's strong words. I mean, most of the time, the person who kills someone else with a gun is the person that's held responsible for a
leave
murder,
it to the Republicans constantly blaming the police. That's not what Anthony Weiner does, and we'll be right back. So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left and James Flippin on your right. This is a very busy time here at the station with the inauguration coming up, a new administration. We've got you covered wire to wire. If you miss any part of the show, you can get it as a podcast on the Red Apple Podcast Network. You can also get James all throughout the week kibitzing with the reporters and also doing the news cuts. He does the news cuts. He does straight news. And then he comes on here and does his opinion. And I honor you for that. I know it's probably hard to do, like sometimes just doing the news.
Yeah,
but
it is kind of sometimes weird.
But here's the thing. Both parts of your job got kind of mashed up this week, as they often do, where it seems like a news story that should kind of not be political suddenly becomes political. And that is the horrible fires that are going on in L.A. And some of what has happened is, while a lot of us are watching and think about anyone we know that might live there and just looking at the sheer annihilation of it, is that a finger pointing is kind of flared up out of this, no pun intended. And some people have kind of pointed out a kind of, again, that famous DEI is coming to rear its ugly head. I'm surprised Dominic doesn't race in here for this segment and grab the microphone. What is the DEI angle about a giant natural disaster that's ravaging a city?
So in terms of, there's a lot of different things to unpack here, and some of it can be fairly classified as political criticism along the lines of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also potentially some of the really super far left environmentalist movements that have kind of played themselves out over the last 20, 30 years. So there's things to unpack, but specifically on the DEI, there's a woman who was appointed as LA's fire chief who happens to be lesbian, I guess, or of the LGBTQ community. And there was sort of some celebration amongst aspects of LA government that this was a important thing to do, right? Like, you want to be inclusive, so you want to have someone from the LGBTQ community who's a fire chief. First and foremost, considering this is such a major wildfire event, people naturally say, well, was that woman the best choice for the job, or did she get the job over someone else potentially because she's lesbian? That's the first aspect of a really base level criticism. There's also the video that's gone viral of one of the assistant chiefs in the LA Fire Department. And forgive me, because some of it's the county fire department, the city, all that kind of stuff. But this assistant chief was featured in a video from Attention, which is a video news site out of LA, where she said, look, people want people that look like them to show up to fires. And we've heard some of that stuff before. You know, the DEI stuff gets centered on, oh, we want actors and actresses who look like us. We want people represented in government who look like us. And it's, in my opinion, sort of kind of a racially motivated thing that gets a little sticky. But in terms of this woman in the video that she shot for Attention, she said, look, don't worry about whether or not I can lift your husband out of a fire because I'm a woman. He shouldn't have gotten himself into that situation in the first place. And a lot of people are like, whoa.
In the fire.
What?
Got it.
What
Okay.
are you talking about, woman? Like that. What if it was an overnight fire? Like, what's he supposed to never cook in his house or ever heat the house or have an electrical issue, whatever? So some of this, and we can get into the water management stuff and the environmental and stuff. I think that's actually, frankly, much more important. But the DEI stuff in a nebulous way is connected to how these people were chosen for their jobs, who's in a leadership position in LA Fire, and whether or not those were the best people for the job.
You said, and that's a great summary, but you said naturally people started to say, is this a DEI? Why is that the natural thing? Why does someone look at the identity of a fire chief and say, oh, it's DEI? I mean, look, from everything I understand, that fire chief was a battalion chief, was a captain, was like worked her way up the chain of command. I think of some of this is like anyone who doesn't look like, you know, Chief O'Flaherty, as we're used to seeing, is suddenly a DEI hire. You say naturally, it's such a weird thing. Now, you told me about the video that someone else put out. I get it. At these times, everyone's like scrolling the internet to try to find some point to be able to make. I think the much bigger issue is there, I mean, first of all, we saw this with Hurricane Sandy here in New York, that a whole bunch of people were like, okay, we don't want to help out New York because they're liberal, blue, whatever, they do whatever. I mean, now we are a little bit protected because we have the mother of all fire departments, the mother of all police departments. They literally make TV shows trying to emulate what our departments look like, and LA doesn't have that benefit. I get it. To me, the thing that was most troubling was that the mayor of the city, this woman named Bass, who's a former member of Congress, I did not overlap with her, she was away on a trip, which it's the nightmare of every mayor. You're going to be away on some trip when something happens, which is why I always said if I were elected mayor, I'll do all my vacationing down south in Rockaway. Like that's as far as I'm going to go.
It's a good line.
She was on this trip, and then she kind of quasi didn't return. I don't know exactly what the facts are. She's in Ghana. To me, that's a problem, but that's bad luck. What is not bad luck is there's this debate that's also sprung up is should you have prepared for this better? So let's talk about that for a moment. I don't know if you've seen this line of the story, which is she cut the fire department. Mm-hmm. And people are saying, you shouldn't have cut the fire department because here we are. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair beef? Or as someone who's always talking about cutting budgets, or you say, look, you can't always be prepared for everything. What do you think about that element of this?
Well, a couple of things. One, in terms of Mayor Bass, supposedly, and this we don't necessarily focus on L.A. news stories ahead of time. This is a huge national story now, but supposedly there were a lot of predictions, warnings, expectations that a major Santa Ana wind event was coming. And throughout these fires, when they first broke out, you're talking 100-mile-per-hour winds.
Yeah.
They talked like a fire hurricane.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a nightmare. So certainly some things that maybe can't be avoided, some things that maybe you do want to try to guard against, and as you mentioned, probably just bad luck that Bass was out of the country at that particular moment. But in terms of the criticism of the preparation or lack thereof for an event like this, and yes, some of the cutting of the fire department's budget, of course, we know it's not a zero-sum situation, right? Like, in other words, you're taking money away from something. City Hall was not saying, hey, L.A. taxpayers have some money back. They were putting it around and putting it towards
and there were a lot of
things.
administrative cuts at the fire department they were doing. They had cut, et cetera. And they cut some overtime, which a lot of people tried to do.
Right. And overtime management is a major concern, even for the agencies here in New York City. But there's a major, as you know, Anthony, as our listeners know, major homeless problem in the LA area, in the sense that it's good weather year round. There's not the same laws, as you've alluded to, here in New York City that mandate people be put in shelters overnight and stuff like that. It's kind of a constant issue that the city of LA is dealing with, and obviously that takes a lot of resources. So some of the, if I understand the story correctly, some of the money that was taken from the fire department's budget was more or less put towards homeless services. That's where people are going to say, okay, are you prioritizing the people who live, thrive, pay taxes, are members of the business community or whatever in LA, or are you prioritizing the homeless? A tough discussion to have, right? I mean, it's not like you should just say, screw those people, throw the street urchins to the wind. I mean, that's not exactly a civilized response either. But if you're risking a major fire event to benefit homeless services, that's where people might say, are our priorities right here?
Here's the thing. A couple of things about this. First, about the Mayor Bass piece. This is an unusual kind of natural disaster or thing to have happen as an executive because unlike, say, a terrorist attack or an earthquake or even a hurricane to some degree, they begin, they happen, then they end, and then you're basically standing still trying to coordinate how you respond once it happened. This thing is kind of rolling as you're happening, flames coming from all sides of the town. I think it would have been tough one way or the other. As far as the kind of the going and taking a look at how this could have been prevented, we are constantly in a situation in government where our taxpayers are saying, I don't want to pay for services that I can't see, touch, feel, and So the incentive to go cut something that you might have a 1 in 20 chance you're going to need is unfortunately the way a lot of these political things are. I will be shocked if Vivek Ramaswamy and Musk don't try to cut the National Fire Service. Because they're like, it's not our job. It's not the national government's job, but we have the National Fire Service, which trains firefighters, puts out fires on national lands, and then goes to places like this. I would not be surprised if you try to cut the national NOAA, national something oceanic. and something administration. Something atmospheric administration. Good. You and I are the same nerd school. But those are the things that help anticipate when they're going to come. Long story short, I am totally fine with having a conversation about the allocation of resources. But to my Republican friends who are like, cut everything, close down agencies, we don't need it. It's someone else can do it. The private sector can do it. This is a moment where basically an act of God, you got to do your best to hang on.
Well, all right. So I think that you make some good points there. But I do also feel as though there's a lot of as you like to say, red meat for our audience that needs to at least be put out on the grill here before we move on. So let's not forget that famously, the state of California has diverted water resources from places like reservoirs and tanks and all the stuff that could be used to fight fires because there's that Delta smelt. This is something that was on 60 Minutes like 15 years ago, where these California officials were really focused on not harming the Delta smelt, which is a tiny little fish, and in doing so, they lost out on the opportunity to divert some water resources to places that could be used for either drinking or fighting fires, agriculture, all that stuff. So there's a concern that the super far-left environmentalist focus in California took away from the ability to fight these fires. They ran out of water in some of the tanks during the fighting events. Maybe that was because the 5 fires burning at once, and I don't know the ins and outs of water logistics, so potentially that's not entirely fair to blame officials for that. There's also been repeated claim and call for better forestry management, like burning up the chaparral and cleaning away some of the dead growth and cutting fire lines and burning. This is stuff that President-elect Trump has criticized fire officials in the past in California for not doing. And just a few weeks ago or months ago, he was on Joe Rogan basically saying California's not doing enough to get ready for this big fire. And then there's other reports that have come out where fire officials have said, again, trying to be fair, that it's just a matter of the wind. If it's blowing certain ways, that there's not a whole lot you can do. So it's hard to know exactly what is or isn't reality. This will be looked at for many, many years to come. But I think there's a lot of people who are saying, from a water management perspective, the Greens won out, and now the city's burning.
Well, 90% of the water in California actually goes to agriculture because it's like, well, you need a lot of water for almonds. By the way, here's a little.
That's a good point.
Here's a little thing you might not know.
Because you on the left, you love
Do
your
you know
almond milk.
that I was made an honorary deputy fire commissioner when I was in Congress because I passed this law to change the death benefits for firefighters, and they gave me this badge and
I didn't
everything.
know that.
Yes,
Okay.
not that that means I know anything, but now I've got a nice
job by
credential.
you for doing that,
But
though.
look, here's the thing that I would say. It's interesting to say, well, we should plan better, but ignore global climate change. No.
Oh, I wondered if this was going to get into it.
That we're not going to talk about. We're going to criticize the left for diverting something to protect a fish, but we're not going to do anything about diverting 100% of our budget. And by the way, you also said forestry management. Another federal agency that's on the Vivek Ramaswamy wasteful thing. Every year, someone makes an amendment,
Well, I'm sure
get
there's
rid of
state
that.
officials that also do aspects of.
Well, here's the problem. We have an enormous amount of federal lands, and we also, the big research and the big strategy things actually localities can't do, so the national government doesn't. Now, does it matter to you and me? We don't live near a national forest. It's not a good use of our tax dollar. Cut it. But for a lot of people who live in like 2/3 of the country that have these issues, you've got to invest in them. Bottom line is, this is a perfect indication to me, of how the two sides think about things. First, the Republicans say it's DEI. They say Democrats are incompetent because it happens to be a black mayor. And interesting, a black cop you also took a shot at earlier. You sound like Dominic Carter more and more every week. But then to criticize the governor and criticize the mayor. It reminds me so much of after Hurricane Sandy. We were trying to get our act together, trying to figure out how to survive, bail each other out, and the Republicans in Congress saying, we don't want to give you guys any aid because you're a blue city. You don't see Democrats doing that. Democrats, we believe, we're all one country.
Right.
When we just had storms down in the South, we didn't say don't help them out.
Unless they were Trump supporters.
We didn't? No.
Well, FEMA was literally told to avoid homes with Trump
was
signs.
not told. God,
Yes,
they were not told that.
Oh,
they,
my
they
gosh,
were
that's
not, they were not
revisionist
told
history.
that. But anyway, I think you can do all these things at once. You can plan for future events. You can hold elected officials like Bass accountable, and you can also say, you know what? Let's stop ignoring it. We have environmental issues that we need to figure out because we're paying a lot now rather than maybe a little bit less earlier.
And look, obviously, our hearts go out to all the people that are affected by this, and you don't want to be just like, totally making a political fight out of something that's so devastating and ongoing at this moment. But I will just say that I think we can probably both agree, if there's any one person in a non-physical way that's been harmed by this as a result, it's definitely Gavin Newsom. I mean, this is a guy who was once upon a time like the rising political star of the Democratic Party, and at this point, he's just been thoroughly embarrassed throughout this entire wildfire event. I mean, did you see that video of the woman walking up to him and saying, Governor Newsom, my daughter's school just burned down. And he said, I'm speaking to President Biden right now. And she says, can I listen to the phone conversation? Oh, actually, I can't get reception.
I mean, maybe. I mean, here's an indication. Maybe that's not going to be such a big thing. I never saw that, and I mean, I assume it's a thing that's out there in social media and everything else. I think you want to talk.
He also lied about how much they'd actually.
You want to talk about who's
back.
been harmed by this? Donald Trump. Donald Trump calling people names, insulting the governor, and all these things when he should be acting like a president. I know he's not in yet, but try to pretend you have some sense of empathy. Try to pretend it's about someone.
I think he's absolutely shown empathy for the people of Southern California.
Has he?
Going after a Bass or a Newscomb is not going after the people of California.
It's doing politics rather than speaking like a leader. I know he doesn't have it in him to think about anyone else because ultimately at the end of the day, he's a 9-year-old child. But in the final 20 seconds, is he ever going to grow up?
I believe that he is quite grown up, and I believe he is quite accomplished, and certainly somebody who's shown that he cares about the American people with the fires that he's walked through to get to where he is right now.
I can tell from the orange makeup he wears every day. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left and James Flippin on your right. So one by one, powerful business leaders, millionaires and billionaires are basically coming to the foot of Donald Trump and plopping in front of him tidings, we'll call them.
Oh, it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, it's like you've got Bezos at the Washington Post basically shutting down the place. You've got just about everybody showing up. I see that Fetterman was invited to come down there.
Going to Mar-a-Lago.
But he's a little bit different. But the business guys.
Scarborough and Minka were kissing the ring.
I know, that's the media guys are a little bit different. But the business guys are all like, we're going to give up in advance. No one did it more transparently. No one did it more kind of just grovelly than Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook. He puts a video up. First, he fires his Obama-era guy that was his chief government affairs guy, puts in a Trump guy, and then he announces, after all this effort to say we're going to try to keep this a safe platform, never mind, we're going to not censor. We're basically using all the language of Musk, and we're going to not have fact checkers anymore. We're going to move our offices out of California into Texas. We're going to return to free speech and no more censorship. And he says that into the microphone. He said, but we're still going to try to keep things safe and nice. And he does it all, by the way, wearing a $1 million watch. Did you see this part of it?
I didn't actually notice that his watch was. I noticed that he's got sort of the kind of Zoomer fro.
He's got the Jew fro going on. I'm not convinced it's real. But anyway,
and the gold chain. Like he's undergoing an image change.
It was very weird. It was very weird. But anyway,
remake, whatever.
But this is right down Main Street for you because this is a thing that you sometimes like the whole idea of getting government out of censorship, getting everyone out of censorship. No one should be censored. Tell me what your takeaway is. You must be happy. You're the audience for this.
I mean, I think that it's, in theory, a good thing that discourse would bend back in the way of free speech online and the ability to express yourself and not having like censorship in the realm of what people do or don't see or can't see just because it's a political difference that's at the center of it. But I kind of potentially have some common ground with you here in the sense that I think what Mark Zuckerberg is doing is very ham-fisted. In other words, he's like, whoa, we kind of got caught for all the stuff we were doing in regards to COVID and the discussions that we had with the White House at that time and the stuff we did around vaccines, and you can't talk about the vaccine. Thou shalt not say the vaccine's this, that, the other. So I do think that there's a sense of kind of it's convenient, politically expedient for him to now suggest that they're more in line with the Musk agenda or whatever. I also just want to note that I believe what Facebook is going to do is go to the community notes model.
So explain what that is. We don't have social media people in our we don't have X people in our audience.
So on Twitter, or X now, formerly Twitter, instead of there being, I guess like fact checkers who might be working for X that are sitting there in an office somewhere saying, that's not quite right, we're going to add this note or strike that from the record, it's peer driven. So if you are Anthony Weiner on X and you see a post that says Anthony Weiner's skin is green and you say, no, it's not, and I'm going to put a community note out there that rates this whole initial post as untruthful, other people can more or less agree or disagree with the community note, and it's supposed to be almost like crowdsourcing fact checking. Like do the peers by and large agree with the veracity of this
more
particular
thumbs
statement?
Up drives the story up, more thumbs down drives it down. But
so Facebook may employ a similar thing, I guess.
So here's my concern about this. I think ultimately the American people do want some level of censorship, if that's the word you want.
In what context?
I'm going to explain. So during COVID, Donald Trump famously made this remark about what would happen if we drank some bleach. Okay, let's just say for a moment that it goes on Facebook when everyone's trying to figure out what to do. Someone puts a post up, here's a great idea. My name is Dr. Vidi Boombas. I say everyone should drink bleach. And a bunch of people start drinking bleach and they're dying. Okay? I think it is not good for anybody that there's this popular post out there telling people how they can die. I don't think it's good when someone posts over and over and over again anti-Semitic slurs. I don't think it's good that when you sit down as a person who's reporting the news here at 77 WABC, makes an effort to see, hey, what is actually right, what is actually wrong. I think that's called being a responsible person in the world. It's not a thing to give a press conference about, to say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. I am totally fine with people insulting Irish people and people insulting whatever and people giving bad advice. Remember, a lot of the places where this all began were a couple of big things. There was a genocide in Rohingya where that spread like wildfire on Facebook, that the other tribe was doing something that they weren't. And before you know it, hundreds of thousands of people were dead. So the idea that, oh my God, this is so great for the world that we're not going to have censorship. One of the responsibilities that comes with speech is being responsible with your speech. And I don't think we should expect the world to be responsible. That's why they have fact checkers to begin with.
Well, it's an interesting broad discussion concerning free speech and the electronic age and social media and stuff like that. Like, in other words, the question has long been, is Facebook, is Twitter, is Google or YouTube, whatever, Instagram, are these platforms publishers or are they forms of communication?
And what difference should it make?
Well, it does make a difference in the sense that when you think about the concept and laws that govern things like liability, whether or not a platform ought to be held liable for something that's said on there, all that kind of stuff. Newspapers, for example, are looked at a certain way, and there's laws that govern that. And yet, if it was something like somebody's talking on the telephone, for example.
No, the laws are different, but we're talking about right and wrong. I mean, what's right? What's right is if you open up a public square, even if you're a business,
right.
If you open up a public square and people are using that public square to harm other people, I don't know what's so wrong about saying, I'm going to take steps to stop this. He just gave a speech about, you know, all those times I testified before Congress that I'm going to take steps to solve this. All the times I turned behind me and said I apologize for the suicides that were created because people were bullied online. Never mind, new president is in town who has a bug up his ass about something.
Yeah, but I mean, again, we're kind of coming back to the same point now where we probably share some level of agreement on that Zuckerberg's just trying to make Meta perform better, and he's more focused on the bottom line of the business.
Just let me ask you as a conservative, don't you want some level of censorship of people doing bad things online?
I think
you always did back in the past. Remember when the internet first started, your side was like, oh, we got to ban pornography. We've got to ban this. We got to ban that. And it was Bill Clinton saying, let's try to make hands off. Let's let this industry grow. And he got his butt kicked for it. Al Gore was like a heretic for saying, I don't like all the violence I have online. Now the Republicans are saying, it's all not so bad. Let's let it happen because Donald Trump and Elon Musk complained about it.
Well, look, I think that, in other words, there's a difference between so-called fact-checking, if you had a magical way to make it unbiased, super rooted in truth, all this kind of stuff, versus censorship, which sometimes falls down the line of what's your ideological preference, how do you see things, and then making sure that the content is curated to fit that. That's one thing, right? Fact-checking, let's say. But I don't mind community notes. I think community notes have been a benefit to X, for example, where sometimes I'll see a post, I have no way of immediately being able to look into factually, is this true, is it not true? Some of those community notes will include source material and say, if you don't necessarily know this, it might benefit you to read this about this post. So it's not to say that there's no upside to any censorship or sort of looking at a fact-checking platform or a way of doing things. Some of that's good. Yeah. You know, in other words, what does an editor do?
Well,
an editor often does that.
That's the point. That's the point. That's the model. You say, well, what is the alternative? The alternative is you have people who make an effort. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that you always get it right. And you can say, look, If someone posts online the chemical formula for water is NaCl and someone says no, it's H2O, that's a fact, okay? But people post online. One of the things he said in his statement is that we made a mistake by trying to stay out of social issues. Let's have those debates. As a sentence, that makes sense. But when it comes down to someone posting, Jews are greedy, they have horns, and they drank the blood of Christ, you're like, well, let's have a nice community note on that. But in the meantime, 14 million people might have seen it, and people are going out. Like, how about the Pizzagate thing?
Well, what about the Pizzagate thing?
Pizzagate, big crazy Q conspiracy. A guy shows up at a pizzeria in Queens with a gun.
And what? Okay, so wait a second.
I'm saying
there's a lot to unpack.
No, I'm saying
there's a lot to unpack with Pizzagate.
I'm saying
because there's also that guy who was the online publisher of some newspaper or whatever, and more or less claimed that he debunked Pizzagate, and then he was convicted for child porn.
Wait a minute, hold on a second. I do not want to get into another one
right,
of your
one
of your deep state conspiracy theories.
That if you don't
except
want
to say that sometimes the deep state conspiracy theory is let's go to Anthony Weiner's house, find out where his laptop is, and hold him hostage if he doesn't get it, which goes on online. Okay, the point I'm making is that you say, well, they have a legal right to do it. Yes, and you can argue. I think it's called Section 230. You can argue they shouldn't be held criminally liable, civilly liable for someone saying something bad on their platform. We can have that conversation. But what that's closer than you might think. What Zuckerberg said at this thing is we no longer are going to be...
The video that he posted.
No, right. We're no longer going to be in the business of trying to protect our customers from harm. That's the summary. Right, and I
did he
don't
actually say it that way.
No, he did. Of course not. Of course, he said we still want you to be friendly out there, y'all.
Okay.
But that's what he was saying, because the things that are in place are to protect their customers, their brand, their advertisers, and everything else.
There's one thing about this that, in a roundabout way, I may actually sort of agree with you on. It's an argument that I used to have with my brother all the time about censorship on Facebook and on YouTube, and at the time, Twitter. I said, look, there needs to be some right-wing social media that's produced, basically. Because, in essence, what we're talking about here is these platforms, these publishers, want their newspaper, their digital newspaper, if that's how you're going to look at X, Facebook, whatever, to be fitting their narrative. So if you're talking about Facebook, Instagram, and then YouTube on the Google side, they lean left, right? We know those organizations, because of their setting in the Silicon Valley, or the people that staff their top level positions, tend to lean left politically. So, and the donations that they make to politicians, you can look at all that. So,
well, used to.
Fair. So, in other words, you need to have a right wing social media, because it's almost like comparing the New York Post to the New York Times or something like that.
Yeah.
But maybe 50 years ago.
I know, but
so now that we have X, it's a more even playing field, and you can kibitz about what the best way is to do editing.
Yeah, I mean, but the bottom line of what Zuckerberg came away with, and he's got like literally billions of people on this thing. Billions of people, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, who knows how many of those accounts are still active?
Actually, right. I mean, you and I are probably the youngest demo for all of it.
Facebook is not exactly thriving.
But I guess what I say, and this is, I do find this to be an interesting conversation, because there's not an easy answer, and I think I'm going to regret this as soon as I say it. The Hunter Biden laptop story.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter Biden laptop story, it was an issue of someone's private laptop being stolen. It seemed weird because it was October of the election.
I wouldn't say stolen. But
no. You're going to see. You're actually going to approve of my setup a little more than you think.
Okay.
It was an issue of it was is it really real? Did it really exist? And they erred on the side of down. They didn't take it off, but they turned on the volume to not let the story be passed around. Mistake. I think it was a mistake. He wound up saying it was a mistake. He turned that off. Twitter banned it all together. They say that was a mistake. Mistakes are going to happen, okay? But you can't let the mistake be the example. I do like the idea that if billions of people are looking at this, there is some corporate person up there who's taking some responsibility to making sure it doesn't become a cesspool of anti-Semitism. I just think that that's not a bad thing. I don't know why we would want anything. Now, you might say, well, the marketplace will decide if they want that. What if the marketplace decides, I love a website that's full of anti-Semitism?
Well, but
that's bad.
I mean, again, you want to talk about something like Threads or Blue Sky or whatever. It's just a cesspool of anti-right wing sentiment
I don't
and
think
hating on Trump and calling him Hitler and his supporters Hitler and all this kind of stuff. You could look at both sides and
I don't believe those two sides balance. I'm sorry, my friend. Criticizing a politician for whatever is not the same as having a place be just rampant anti-Semitism.
All right, being anti-white or anti-Christian, and there's plenty of that as well.
I don't think the two things are equal. Like the problem of saying, and this is a common.
You may not.
It's a common thing that happens with you on the left. You grab a thing, which may be a thing, and you try to form an equivalency with something like the rampant anti-Semitism and that's going on.
Well, look,
I just don't think. I'm not saying that there's not someone out there who gets on Blue Sky and says, "Oh, I'm anti-white. I hate white people," but that's not a phenomenon the way the anti-Semitism is online.
By the way, I just want to note the unique position that you're in as somebody on the left who's got a problem with anti-Semitism. Most people on the left don't feel that same way.
A lot of Jews, left or right, feel that way, and a lot of friends of Jews. By the way, are you in that camp? Are you in the friend? Are you in FOJ?
I am a friend. I like to classify myself as a friend of Jews.
All right, let's finish on an issue that is.
Can I just say quickly about the Hunter
we can stick
thing?
with this.
I just want to say quickly, I would not classify it as a mistake that story was taken away. I believe that was a very heavy-handed effort by various elements of left-wing bias in government, in media, whatever, to totally kill a story that should not have been killed.
You are never going to find a more of an expert on the Hunter Biden story than I, and I think I've tried to do it down the line. I've read through everything, including the X-File kind of thing. There has never been a really good anyone pointing to anything solid that shows that. These are social media companies in 2019 were being all kinds of law enforcement in the Trump administration was telling these people, be careful, they're coming at us, meaning Russians and Chinese are trying to influence our election. These were Trump officials that were putting that pressure on people, and they didn't want to make the same mistake that they made in 2016 of doing nothing. I believe it was relatively good faith, but a mistake.
Let me just say that for those of you who are listening to the audio and not watching the video, I'm rolling my eyes aggressively. That's all I'm going to say.
I don't know the other ways to roll your eyes, James Flippin, except the way my former wife used to do it, very passively. I could barely notice. Sometimes we'd be driving in the car and I'd look over. Are you rolling your eyes over there? Well, you know who never inspires anything but foot tapping and hand clapping and no eye rolling? That's Vinny Medugno coming up.